What's up, everybody? This is Stacey B, and this is my spoiler review for the movie Us by Jordan Peele, starring Lupita and Nyongo and Winston Duke. So, if you have not seen this film, go ahead and see the film, then come back and listen in on this spoiler and hear my thoughts on some of the various Easter eggs, various symbolisms, allegories, metaphors, etc. that Jordan Peele presented in this film. Just sharing my thoughts. Of course, there's probably millions of other perspectives on this, but this is my perspective. So again, this is a spoiler review. You've been warned. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let's go. Us Decoded. Us opens with a family that we go back in time. We go back to 1986. You have a family of three. You have a mother, a father, and a daughter, Adelaide. Adelaide, she's kind of in the background watching her parents. You can tell her parents kind of have a strain in their relationship, but she's there. She's enjoying the amusement activity. They're just living an everyday life. Her father ends up winning her a prize after playing some amusement type games. She chose the prize. She said she wanted the number 11. The number 11 is often mentioned a lot throughout this movie. And when she chooses the number 11, it happens to be a Michael Jackson Thriller t-shirt. Again, this is 1986. Michael was the king of pop. I think he still is, but, definitely the king of pop back in 1986. So, he was the guy. And the choice for Jordan to use the Michael Jackson t-shirt, I thought was quite profound. I mean, when you think about Thriller, Michael in that film was a duality. He was both a good guy and a bad guy. And that, to me, really explains this film. This film is about duality, whether it be the duality of yourself, the duality of this country, the duality of your family, of your spouse, of your children. It goes on and on and on. But there's this duality. There's yin and yang. Even within religion, there's duality. So that was just profound to me. And that was just one of the many Easter eggs. And just to be clear, I'm not and cannot probably touch on all of the Easter eggs of this film. And let me, expound a little bit more on that. I can really only, in this spoiler review, give you my perspective. And Jordan Peele, I think in many ways, is also telling the audience that yes, there are Easter eggs, and pretty sure he has a message he's trying to share and his own perspective. But I really think he wants you to color this film with your own perspective, your own experiences. Because even when you look at the movie poster, it's very similar to a Rorschach test. Rorschach test is a psychological test in which subjects' perceptions of ink blocks are recorded and then analyzed using psychological interpretation, complex algorithms, or both. So it's really about, what you see in the Rorschach test is really based on your own experience and your own personality. So what you see will be based on that, not based off of what Billy next to you sees, you know what I mean? Because you all just have different experiences. So when you see this film, you may not get anything that I'm saying because I have a different experience from you. I've heard people look at this film and say, when I see the red suits, I see, with the tethered, I see Republicans. And then I've heard another perspective who said, I see a slave revolt. So, two completely different perspectives. And you know what? Both may be right. And I think that's what Jordan Peele is pretty much perhaps trying to say, like, hey, what you see is what you see, and it will be true to you. And then, there is an opening sequence where you see, really just bunnies. Definitely has a meaning in this film. particularly when it comes to cloning and even spiritually when it comes to kind of fertility and being born again, etc. He hits on a lot of those things. So that was quite an abstract opening. But what I want to touch on is also there was a cut or even a flashback within the flashback after the whole funhouse situation with Adelaide seeing her shadow self. There's a cut to where she's in her home and she sees a Hands Across America commercial.
Hi, I'm Oprah Winfrey. I need your help. On Sunday, May 25th, I need you to hold someone's hand. It can be anyone you want. Your family, your neighbor, your best friend, even a stranger. Join Channel 7 and 6 million Americans coast to coast in a chain to help fight hunger and homelessness in the United States. Call 1-800-USA-9000 and lend a hand across America.
Very profound on Jordan's part. Hands Across America was a demonstration that took place in 1986 that was to help homelessness. People were donating money and they were going to come together, hold hands in a line for 15 minutes across America to symbolize the end of homelessness. Apparently, this Hands Across America didn't really do well. It didn't really raise the amount of money it needed to, etc. But, that's more the literal situation. But what I liked about Jordan including this in the film was that he clearly is telling the audience, this film is also about classism. This is about the invisible, those who are so-called underclass or in the underground, and how people of privilege tend to, yes, we may do a program for the underprivileged or, the so-called underclass. We may give money. We may do all of this performance for them, like the Hands Across America. But really in our everyday lives, they're invisible. In fact, the very first frame of the film was a statement about tunnels and about abandoned subway systems, etc. And how, there are thousands of miles across America. And, there is talk that there are perhaps habitants in reality, that there are habitants of these underground tunnels and underground subway systems. Just go to YouTube and do a search on the mole people, who they call the mole people, who are really homeless people living, I guess, underground, seeking safety, seeking shelter. And they're forgotten. While they're underground trying to survive, here the privileged are above them living their best lives, not paying attention. But forget even the underground. How often do you see homeless people around you sitting next to you and you ignore them? You put on your headphones, you clutch your purse. They are invisible. They are the voiceless. And to me, Jordan using Hands Across America is a statement to that. But not just with homeless people. You could apply that to any type of oppressed or so-called underclass of people. You can apply it to the prison industrial complex. With the fact that the tethered people were wearing jumpsuits, it looked like, a prisoner's jumpsuit. And they are often voiceless. Oftentimes, a prisoner who leaves jail and then tries to come back into society, particularly with a felony, they are often voiceless. We don't pay attention to them. We don't care about their needs. We don't really try to rehabilitate them. Sometimes they can't vote. Sometimes they can't buy property. They no longer are able to pursue the American dream. But you can also apply it to slavery, the Underground Railroad. Slaves were just there to work. In many ways, they weren't looked at as human beings, even though we were human beings. As we heard the shadow Adelaide in this film say, we are Americans. While you were there in your comfort, we were here in our struggle. And there's also within the whole Hands Across America, I felt that Jordan was also making a statement about immigration. In an interview, Jordan mentioned how this film also tackles the idea of how, particularly we as Americans, have a fear of other. And other right now in our present day tends to be certain immigrants, immigrants from Mexico, and how we want to create this wall, not we, but we have a president who wants to create this wall, this border, to prevent the other from coming over here because they are a so-called enemy. And I think that Jordan is really making a statement about our current Trump America and how these tethered in the film are the so-called other. And once they come from these tunnels, which by the way is also another way that certain immigrants may come over to our borders, it's not just through jumping walls. Sometimes they come through tunnels. But I think that Jordan perhaps may be making a statement there as well. Once this other rose up and revolted and came, to the surface, they created this Hands Across America. You can also look at it as a symbol of a border, a wall, because at the end of the film, it looked like a wall across America. And we often have that. We often want to segregate, whether it be in present day when it comes to, again, preventing certain immigrants from entering our land, and in the past, or even now still, in terms of class, there's often redlining. The upper class is here, and then maybe a divide through railroad tracks. You have the so-called underclass or lower class, so which neighborhood you belong in. And if you're from the lower class, you better not cross those railroad tracks. You better not cross this border and come into our space. And then you also have, when it comes to race, there was segregation. There was a divide. So that imagery, in the end, I saw all of that. And also just another point when it comes to the voiceless, particularly when it comes to homeless people and this whole choice to use the Hands Across America. When you look at the tethered people who were voiceless, and in fact, most of them, if not all of them, with the exception of Red, could not talk. And I think that was also a statement, because they weren't treated as humans, so they were never taught to talk. But I think that's also a symbolism of they're voiceless, but they're trying to gain their voice and trying to be heard. And so when you think about, again, Hands Across America, and when it comes to, let's apply it again to homelessness, I remember Tupac Shakur doing an interview with MTV News.
If I know that in this hotel room they have food every day, and I'm knocking on the door every day to eat, and they open the door, let me see the party, let me see like them throwing salami all over just like throwing food around, or they're telling me there's no food in here. You know what I'm saying? Every day, I'm standing outside trying to sing my way in. You know what I'm saying? We are hungry, please let us in. We are hungry, please let us in. After about a week, that song is going to change to, we hungry, we need some food. After 2-3 weeks, it's like, give me all the food, breaking out the door. And after a year, you just like, I'm picking the lock, coming through the door, blasting, you know what I'm saying? It's like you hungry, you reached your level, you don't want any more. We asked 10 years ago. We was asking with the Panthers. We was asking with them, with civil rights movement. We was asking, now those people that were asking, they're all dead and in jail. So now what do you think we're going to do?
And when you think about the tethered people in this film, how they revolted against not being heard, not being seen, not having the privileges or not being afforded the privileges that their fellow Americans were enjoying. If they continue to get ignored, as Tupac said, it turns from I'm asking for food to I'm going to take your food. And so that in many ways also could symbolize Again, the Hands Across America, how, oh, it's all lovely and wonderful, but really, you ignore people long enough, this peaceful demonstration could be turned into something much more, not always violent, but in the movie's case, it became violent, but also just a louder voice, a stronger demonstration. And I think that statement was also made in this film. There was also a little extra Easter egg that was included in the Hands Across America commercial that I wanted to point out. Not including the obvious that Jordan decided to use Cal 11 News, obviously, again, focusing on the number 11 again with the Hands Across America commercial used in the film. But also, some more within the actual commercial was pointed out that focuses on twins and also the number 11. And I think that when a creator is so in tune with their intention and with their purpose, I believe God shows up. And Jordan probably always felt, okay, I'm going to use the Hands Across America, I'm going to make XYZ statement here, etc. But he didn't create Hands Across America commercial. He had nothing to do with that. He was probably a kid when that was created. But if you remember, when you see this film, what was interesting was, even within that commercial, the number 11 shows up. More implied, but it shows up. How? Through the Twin Towers. Also twin, duality. Because in that commercial it says from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Twin Towers in New York. That gave me chills. Because again, this film is about duality, and even within that commercial, duality was mentioned when it came to Twin Towers. And what happened to those Twin Towers? On what? 9/11. A tragedy happened. A tragedy that many called was like an apocalypse. And that is in essence what we're about to witness in this film. So that to me is God showing up. Because again, Jordan didn't create that commercial, but it fit perfectly with the narrative it seems he's trying to create in this film. So that's really kind of the social piece. At least that's my perspective when it came to the Hands Across America. I'm sure there's a lot more to that, but that's, for the most part, what I saw. But then in this film, again, it's not just about the social aspect, I feel, or, the classism and all these things. You can also take away from this film kind of a self-help approach, where you look at yourself as an individual. What are you doing, or how is your duality hindering you as an individual? And I felt Jordan profoundly touched on that as well. In fact, he recently had a quote where he said, when it comes to this film, he's like, we are our own worst enemy because we are so capable of lying to ourselves, lying about our guilt, our shame, and our sins. We are very good at saying it is not us, it's them. And how often in your life have you had this duality about you, and the shadow part of yourself causes a lot of destruction in your life? But what do? We want to blame the devil, or we want to blame our upbringing. Dad wasn't in the home, or my mother didn't love me. We just want to blame everybody else, but we never take any kind of accountability for any of our shortcomings. Because the reality is we all have a duality. We have a higher part of ourselves, but we also have a lower part of ourselves. And I think that in this film, when you see particularly the Adelaide character, she had her shadow self and she has her higher self, and they're often fighting each other. And I think that you can apply that when you look at this film. You can really look at those two characters and see yourself in that. Well, really, with all the characters were fighting themselves. And when you look at it, that's a profound statement that Jordan is making. We see it kind of physically, but really, that's something internally. It's something intangible in many ways that I think that we as human beings deal with on a daily basis, where we're just constantly fighting our lower self, trying to prevent that lower self from taking over our lives. And sometimes it's a little blurred there may be certain parts of your higher self that doesn't serve you well. Then there may be a part of your lower self that may serve you well. Perfect example, this is a spoiler review, is we look at the Adelaide character. Turns out that they were switched. This whole time we were rooting for, Adelaide, and it turns out she was the shadow Adelaide, the so-called lower self Adelaide, and the person revolting was the higher self Adelaide, the real Adelaide. And so, which one do I root for? Which one is the right way to go? And I think that Jordan is saying, it's not always black and white, even within yourself. There's certain parts of your higher self that may not serve you, but then there's certain parts of your lower self that will serve you. And you got to figure out which one is the best in your circumstance. And I guess an example of that would be, sometimes, of course, you should take the higher road, for the most part. But there are times where you do have to be a little aggressive. There are times where you may have to break the rules a little bit to win in a certain circumstance. And that could arguably be your lower self, because you look at the real Adelaide who was kidnapped. Her demonstration was questionable. She's out here telling people to kill other Americans, other human beings. That's not necessarily a good thing, but at the same time, she was wronged in her life. So, this higher self had to do some dark things for the greater good. So, that's quite a complex concept here. When you think about your own duality, sometimes it's blurred lines. I've even heard some people say, when it comes to the whole self-help piece, that, even though the fake Adelaide, did the wrong thing, or the so-called wrong thing, by kidnapping the real Adelaide and sending her down to the tunnels, you could almost have a different perspective on that when it comes to yourself. Sometimes you have to kill or lock away a part of yourself that some may think is a higher part of yourself, but is really a lower part of yourself. Sometimes you have to lock away the weaknesses within you. You have to kill that part of yourself. And so when it came to the so-called fake Adelaide, here she was in this tunnel, but she wanted better for herself. And then you had the real Adelaide who kind of wandered off, couldn't figure out what she wanted, didn't stick with her family, didn't appreciate what she had. And so the so-called lower Adelaide said, well, hey, I'm going to appreciate this. I'm going to lock this part of myself, or lock this version of myself away, and I'm going to find my privilege. I'm going to pursue my happiness, the pursuit of happiness in America. I'm going to go to the surface. I'm going to appreciate my family. I'm going to learn to speak. I'm going to become my best self. You are not appreciating that. So I'm going to strip that down. And so, and how often do we maybe have to have that conversation with ourselves? We say, hey, I have this fear within me, or I have this addiction, or I have whatever shortcoming within me. I need to kill that and overcome that and have the courage to pursue my dreams, to pursue my happiness. And so in many ways, just again, from a self-help point of view, the fake Adelaide taking the real Adelaide down could be a symbol of that, of what we deal with as human beings on a daily basis, where we constantly have to fight to stay high, to stay up, and to be our best selves. I like that Jordan doesn't per se tell us what to think. He doesn't explain every Easter egg. in many ways, again, he's saying, find yourself, see yourself, watch yourself. And maybe through that, even on just an individual level, forget the social piece, even though I think that is present in this film. But on an individual level, this film is quite beneficial because that is such a truism. We have to lock away the shadow part of ourselves, the dark part of ourselves, and just go higher. Reach that higher ground within yourself. So I've seen a few people, or I've heard a few people who have seen this film, and they've asked, particularly when it came to the plot twist, how the Adelaide we've been rooting for turns out to be the fake Adelaide, the one that was originally tethered, and the one that was, invading and trying to, I guess, kill the family was actually the real Adelaide. So when you see it the first time, it's a horror. But if you see it the second time, you're like, wow, this is a tragedy. You want the real Adelaide to get her life back. Or, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But some people have wondered, well, or think that it's kind of a plot hole on Jordan's part, because the real Adelaide, when she's in the family room and she first faces the fake Adelaide and her family, and really tells the story of the tethered and how, she suffered, like when you had comfortable clothes, I didn't have that. When you had food, I had to eat raw rabbit, and, you could choose your mate, I couldn't, etc. She went through this whole dialogue about what it meant to be of the tethered. And some were like, well, why didn't you just say, hey, you are really the tethered. You are the one that's supposed to be, in the tunnel. I'm supposed to be up here and you stole my life. But I think that Jordan purposely did that because you can almost look at it from the perspective of maybe, as we've often seen with folks that we just in our own lives that we deem special. A lot of times people want to maintain that status. So when you really dissect the real Adelaide not really wanting to reveal that, okay, I'm not really of you, my fellow tethered, I'm really of the so-called upper class or the upper world or the higher world. I was really just kidnapped, So you wonder, like, well, why wouldn't she want to reveal that? I think that in a way it's showing that even with her struggle, even with her tragedy, she wanted to maintain a certain level of privilege on her own individual privilege. And that privilege was she was deemed special. She was deemed a messiah. She was the leader. And if she were to reveal that, hey, I'm not really special, maybe that title would have been taken away from her. And I think we've seen that in real life, but we've also seen it in film, particularly The Wizard of Oz. Wizard of Oz doesn't per se deal with doppelgangers, but it does deal with another world and kind of invading another world, if you will, or just feeling like other in another world. And when you think about Dorothy and how she traveled to Oz, etc., and how everyone in Oz was honoring the Wiz. And Dorothy eventually realizes that the Wiz wasn't anyone special. He was just a man whose hot air balloon got into an accident or whatever happened, and he ended up in this other world. But because he was different, they looked at him like he was a messiah, but he really wasn't a messiah. And, obviously this film is much darker than The Wizard of Oz, but you could almost look at the real Adelaide like that. She's going to maintain this lie along with the fake Adelaide because, hey, yes, you have your privilege up above where you have your comfort and the things that I maybe wanted, but I kind of, even in my underworld, kind of have a privilege, and I don't necessarily want to let that go either. I like that I'm special. I like that I can just snap my fingers and people do what I tell them to do, even in my struggle. And so that's something I kind of caught on. I don't know if others did. Tell me if you did. But, that may be why she didn't really want to also reveal the lie. They just both kind of kept the secret that, hey, yes, I know we switched, but I'm going to maintain my position, but I'm also going to try to take your, the real Adelaide wanted to maintain her position, but also take back her position. Or I guess in time she wanted the comfort as well. But yeah, she wasn't going to not be viewed as special anymore. I think that may have been why Jordan chose to still have her keep with that narrative that she's of the tethered, those are her people, and she's special. So like I said, this is quite a deep film. So many Easter eggs in this film. We talked about the social piece and political piece a little bit. And we also talked about the individual side of this and the self-help piece that you can get from this. But there's obviously a religious piece. And we saw the number 11 quite often in this film. We also saw the bunnies, which, when you think about Easter, at least the American way, we have the bunny as a representation of that, and that in many ways symbolizes to be born again, the resurrection, fertility, etc. But let's talk about this number 11. Number 11 can often be actually something of good luck, but in this film it was used through the Bible verse Jeremiah 11:11. And when you think about 11:11, those are numbers that are mirroring each other. And they could even look like the symbol of twins. When you think about even like Geminis, the twin symbol. So there's duality in that. And there's also, when you read the Bible verse, there's a warning in that. The Bible verse says, "Therefore, this is what the Lord says, I will bring on them a disaster they cannot escape. Although they cry out to me, I will not listen to them." Apparently, when it came to the book of Jeremiah, I'm not a Bible scholar, but apparently God was upset that the people were breaking his covenant, not appreciating the gifts given to them. And when you look at this film, there were several examples of that. There were characters who were extremely vain. There were characters who, like Gabe, was extremely materialistic and also kind of envious of the Tyler family and the material possessions they had. You had the Zora character who had this talent to run track, but instead she wanted to kind of waste away her life on the phone. And she just didn't appreciate all these privileges that they had, whereas you have the tethered people who were below ground experiencing what those above ground were experiencing, but more in a puppet way. And like who we later find to be the real Adelaide said, in a cold way, they experienced a shadow version of the privileges that you were taking advantage of. In fact, when you see the tethered people, when they walk into the home, they look around at the beautiful art. You even saw the character Abraham touch the drapes. He's just looking like, wow, these people are really living this privileged life, something we never saw, something we never experienced, and finally we're here. But they didn't appreciate that. So I think that Bible verse really touches on that, and how because of that, this needs to be taken away from you. I guess the real Adelaide kind of represents God. She was the Messiah. That's how the tethered people looked at her. She was like the Messiah. And so here she was directing her followers to come and take away these comforts from those above who didn't appreciate it. And they finally were able to be in a position to appreciate it. In fact, you even saw the Elizabeth Moss character, I believe her name was Kitty. Her shadow person killed Kitty, but was able to then appreciate lipstick and makeup and being able to see herself, something that she probably wasn't able to do below ground, obviously. She was able to appreciate her beauty. That's kind of the religious piece that I saw. I know that there's a lot more in that, because Jordan also mentioned how we could clone the bodies, but we really can't clone the soul. The soul is much higher. The soul is God-given. And a little bit more on the soul, as I said, that comes from God. And like I said, in this film, the real Adelaide revealed how the government tried to create clones to control the masses, but found they could only clone the body and not the soul. So if you look at it, that's in the film, but even if you look at it in terms of our own lives, it's pretty much stating, the way I looked at that is saying, the government really can only control you physically, but it can't control you spiritually. And we always see in America, there's this battle between church and state, and it's supposed to be separated, because really you can't control someone's spiritual self. You can't control their soul. And when you look at the system, I felt in some ways the government has historically tried to do that. The government for centuries has tried to control definitely our bodies, and even perhaps the way we think and our soul levels, but it just never works. And examples of that would be through something like racism. Racism is not God made. That's man-made. It's a man-made system. It's a social construct, and many of us follow it, or many of us are victims of it. But we've seen, even within that system, the soul of the human being reject that system. Blacks over here, whites over here, etc. And we're going to separate you. But then the soul of the human being historically has rejected that. We saw it in the Loving case. A spiritual thing happens. Spiritually, people can become connected and fall in love. Their souls, they become soulmates, if you will. The government can't control that. So go ahead and create your man-made system of racism or sexism, but the soul of the people always overcome those systems. That's what I took from the religious piece. And I know that there's more. Please share below what other religious pieces you saw. Last point I want to make is, we know with the big reveal, and there were definitely hints throughout the film that the Adelaide we were rooting for was really the fake Adelaide. Because there were moments where when she would kill someone, she would start grunting and kind of making animalistic noises. And I don't know, I take from that, one, of course, it's giving you a hint that, she's really of the tethered people. And you can even see her son, Jason, interesting name he had, by the way, Jason, where he always wore a mask similar to the character Jason of another horror flick. So yeah, interesting little homage again, it seems, from Jordan Peele. But he even started to recognize, hey, something's different about my mother. Maybe she's really of this other world, or, of this underground world, and maybe she's kind of, fronting a little bit. Because, he heard those animalistic sounds, but on a much deeper level, that's what we saw literally on the screen. But on a much deeper level, if you think about the act of killing, that is quite animalistic. And we as human beings, we often pride ourselves on being, the rational of the species here on Earth. We're intellectual. We built these buildings. We are of the rational. But there are, again, it goes to the duality. There's duality as individuals, but there's duality as a group of people, as a species. And as human beings, there is an animalistic side of us. Like I was having a conversation with my mother where she discussed, when do the kind of animalistic sides of human beings come out? And she mentioned how often it would come out when you're faced with betrayal, or you're faced with greed or envy, etc. There's various places where the animal side of certain human beings would come out, because the reality is most people do not engage in violence, that deep lower self, of a human being. But obviously we have seen humans who have done that, who have felt wronged in a relationship. So instead of just walking away and doing the rational thing, they, engage in a crime of passion. Or there's people who are just greedy and want your money, and they then maybe take your life for that. Or there's people who are just envious of you, and they may take your life for that. So that's that animalistic thing, and the duality of human beings. And again, thank God most human beings overcome that side of themselves, or block that side of themselves. But it is within the human being. There is a primal part of us, and I felt when Adelaide was killing and engaging in, even though she was, even though it was self-defense and she was trying to preserve her life and the life of her family, still, just that act of killing is still very low for any human being. And the moment she did it, you heard that animalistic sound, and I thought that was pretty interesting. So there's my thoughts on Us. Again, like I said, there's tons in this film. I only tackled a few things. There's several more Easter eggs, obviously, in this film, and several other point of views and theories out there. But I thank you for taking the time to listen to mine, or a few of mine. I have others, but I just didn't share it because, again, it would just be too long. But thank you so much. Please subscribe, comment, like, and let's have a discussion. Let's keep talking about Us. Hope you enjoyed the film. I did. Like I said on my spoiler-free video, I gave it a 9 out of 10. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's masterful. Jordan Peele is the man. I can't wait to see more of his work.